Yeah. So now we come to the issue of mold, which is highly prevalent. How many homes do you think are affected by mold?
I would have to say, I mean, this is just my guess, but probably from some of the ways that our houses are built, like 80% of the houses or more might have some issue with mold. It could be minor, like in your bathroom, you can
Hmm.
see a little bit, or it could be more major that you actually see visible mold like growing. But the problem is like the building materials are cardboard and
Mm.
wood, which are susceptible to mold growth. If it gets wet, then you have a chance of mold growing really, really quickly because of the type of, organic material that our houses are made of. And then also like the way our houses are built with air tightness. So it can trap moisture in various parts of the house that if the airflow is not, working properly, then you end up getting condensation in various places, which then facilitate the growth of mold eventually.
Hmm.
So it's tricky. And I'm not a building scientist, but I've studied a little bit of this just from unfortunately having my patients have to go through this. It's tricky because, not all mold inspectors are good at looking at these things and all the testing techniques for mold are not the best either. I mean, there's not one size fits all for the best testing for the house, which then can lead to patients, not knowing that they have mold. And so that can be tricky.
What
But
kind
yeah,
of
I think,
tests do you do in your clinic?
well, we check the patients. So
Mm.
we check patients for the mold. So, for testing the body, we typically start off with either urinary mycotoxins and or antibodies for mycotoxins. So I've found that more recently antibodies and mycotoxins is a little bit more accurate
Mm.
on giving you a better interpretation of your immune system's having to deal with mold or not. Because urinary mycotoxins, people can pee it out and they may not have an immune response if their body's detoxing well. And some people that are really sick, their detoxification ability is not so good. So they're not excreting it all the way through. So they can have false negatives, on their urinary mycotoxin test. So not everybody's capable of excreting. Those are the ones that are building up of the mycotoxins inside. So then the antibody test typically is a better option because if you have a reasonably okay immune system and if you're not complete, like your immune system is not creating any antibodies at all, you'll probably have some type of response there.
So we've seen in people, the same household, same, problems with mold in the building. One member is debilitated. The other one is walking around as if there's nothing has happened. So,
Yeah.
is urinary excretion a large part of how, the difference between these people are? Like what kind of factors affect how we process
Uh,
the
well,
mold?
one is urinary excretion, which is the one that we can actually test for, but the other one is hepatobiliary excretion via your liver, gallbladder, and your stools.
Mm.
So that is a very important part, but it's not really easily testable. You can't really test the mycotoxin in the stool, so you can't really tell if someone's releasing things better or not. And there's also like a genetic component if their immune system is more easily primed in the response to mold as well. So that's why some people are able to walk around and deal with mold and some people are not,
Hmm.
so some people will then have more severe symptoms as a result of mold because their body just may not be clearing the toxins as easily or their immune system is again primed and now they're creating like an autoimmune or inflammatory condition against themselves.
Do you find mold infections very difficult to treat, or do when you see them, you're like, oh, I got this. I'll get rid of it
It's
for you. How do you?
it's a mixed bag because there's some that are very straightforward. Like they respond well to antifungals, they detox well, and it's just easy breezy. And also that they also are able to clear out the mold in their house. If they have either good inspection or very simple exposure where they could just change out like a windowsill or clean up the leaves in their yard, that are like blowing dust into their house. So those could be, like the simple cases. But there's very difficult ones because then like mold can turn into a condition like called chronic inflammatory response syndrome, CIRS, which is a, multi-level inflammatory response syndrome. And their immune system is then primed. So it affects multiple organ systems. And so it's not as simple as just killing the mold and detoxing, because that will get a good chunk of the symptoms cleared out. But sometimes other, processes need to be managed, such as their histamine response, some of the, neurological aspects. And sometimes the limbic system definitely needs to be rebooted too, because the brain will remember like the trauma from mold and that experience, and then gets them stuck into a fight or flight mode all the time. And it's hard to heal when you're in a fight or flight.
This is not psychological. This is a physiological fight and flight.
Yeah, physiological fight or flight. So then when you're in that, fight or flight state, your parasympathetic nervous system is, suppressed, or it's not functioning as well. So then you're already not detoxing well. You're not eliminating pooping that well. And then your hormones are on high alert, or your cortisol is through the roof. So all these things get thrown off, and that's where it gets tricky, because you have to manage those things. And some of those patients are not likely to be able to tolerate the antifungal medications that are needed to evict the mold too. So you got to kind of work in a balance of doing what you can, and then working on at least the foundation, which is the detoxification pathways. But sometimes the nervous system has to be rebooted, and hormones have to be, managed or set. And then definitely managing the histamine response, because that's the biggest thing that'll drive a lot of symptoms for people.
Well, that sounds like a lot.
It's a lot,
the limbic system, the hormones and histamine. Okay. So you got a lot of work cut out for you. How do you modulate the histamine response?
Well, the simple thing is to use antihistamine, supplements or medications. I mean, those are all nice band-aids for the symptoms. Peptides I found really effective, like the KPV peptide you're familiar with.
Yes.
That one's a really good mast cell, stabilizing. It also helps with the immune system a bit. But the thing is, like, those are all just managing the symptoms, but really treating the root of why the body's creating a lot of histamine is where it gets into more of the, what's called the cell danger response, which is another kind of pathway where the cells start creating a lot of histamine to defend yourself against the mold or other infections or perceived infections too. So a lot of that goes back to like stabilizing the cell membranes. So if you can stabilize and protect the cell membranes, they're not going to have so much of these insults that are triggering then the release of histamine. So that's one of the ways of doing it. The other way is also working on the limbic system, making the body feel safe. If the body feels safer, it doesn't have to then create these defensive mechanisms to defend against targets that are known or unknown.
How do you work on the limbic system?
I don't personally do any of the work on patients, although I do recommend lots of ways of doing it. But there's quite a few limbic system programs that I recommend, such as DNRS or Gupta or Primal Trust, or like meditation, guided meditation work. And then also sometimes they recommend the use of psychedelics like ketamine or mushrooms, microdosing mushrooms, as a way to facilitate the brain neuroplasticity to take place. And then also the use of their own like conscious or subconscious meditation work to get them, to let the body know that they can repair themselves.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds,
yeah.
fantastic.
And sometimes,
So,
there's hypnotherapy,
right.
there's other type of techniques like a neuroemotional technique or like emotional release techniques. These are all good ways of kind of letting the body feel safe again. So then that way your immune system is helping you out. Like you're not fight or flight all the time. You have a lot more reserves in tolerating some of the stressors that are coming physiologically.
That's so interesting, because people don't talk about mold toxicity and resetting the limbic system. So this is, very interesting. So when a patient comes in with all kinds of strange symptoms, you're checking their mycotoxins for fungal infections, and also you're checking all kinds of bacterial and viral infections at the same time?
It depends on their budget and also the symptomology. But yeah, I do. If in a perfect world, we'll try to check out without Lyme, other infections, bacterial, parasitic, heavy metals, and environmental toxins and mold toxins or mycotoxins. And then also, various testing on the immune system response to these things. So yeah, in a perfect world, if we test everything, that's what we would try to find out, because this gives you more information of what has affected the immune system. Because it could be any number of these things. It could be in combination of them all, depending on how severe the case is.